Hey folks, my name is Nate Salzman. I'm with Jefferson Patterson Park, and today we're going to be talking about how to make this right here. This is a caulking iron. Caulking irons were used for making boats watertight. So you have your planks of wood and you have gaps in between. And you have to fill it up with something that's going to be able to expand and contract as the wood dries and gets wet. So you take this tool, you'd take some old rope, defray it, and make what's called oakum. You'd stuff it in there and you'd tap the cracks and fill it up using this tool right here. So this is a very, very important tool for anybody who does ship repairs or making ships. So this is very important for Maryland's history because Maryland made a lot of ships, and obviously we're right on the Chesapeake, so we use a lot of boats as well. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this on again. This is my forge right here. And when I turn this on, besides being very loud, it's actually adding oxygen to my fire. And that's going to allow that fire to get even hotter, which allows me to heat up my metal to a higher temperature, which lets me work it a little bit more. So right now I'm doing the first step in making my caulking iron, which is I'm starting to make the top piece right here that I'm going to actually be hitting. And what I'm doing is called upsetting. Upsetting is when you take material from something that's long and thin and you sort of compress it and make it a little fatter. When you're blacksmithing, you're really not removing material most of the time, you're just sort of moving it around. And so that's what we're doing. You'll notice I'm wearing one glove because this glove gets a little close to the heat. There we go. So you got a nice good red hot heat. I'm just gonna tap it. And as I tap it, I'm actually making the material thicker. I'm also bending it out of place, so I gotta adjust it every now and again. And with each tap, you'll notice I'm sort of rotating it, and that's to try and keep it from bending as badly. So it might not look like I'm doing much of anything, but I'm actually adding a lot of material. I'm making this a lot thicker than it was before. And I can show you that I'm doing that. So, right here, we've got our pritchett hole, which we're going to be using for our next activity. And this is the end that I haven't messed with. As you can see, fits in there nicely. But on the side that I've been hitting, you can see it's much bigger. So we're going to give this one more heating, and once we do that, we should be ready for our next step. When I'm putting this in here, I'm trying to put it in strategically right along the edge, because I don't want to heat up too much of the handle, because otherwise it'll get a little toasty. Every now and again, you'll actually see me take a little water and drip it on here, and that lets me just make sure that it's cool enough for me to touch. Because even though I'm wearing a glove, that heat can still travel through. So, I mentioned earlier that we're making a caulking iron. I want to talk a little bit about why the job of being a caulker was so important. If you are a good caulker, your boat will stay afloat. You're going to put in just enough material that your two boards don't rub against each other and actually create giant gaps. And you're going to put in enough material that no water gets in between. But also, if you put in too much material, what will happen is, as those boards start to expand and press against each other, you'll actually have so much pressure that you can actually cause literal boards to just sort of shatter and explode. Fun fact, I actually know somebody who that happened to, where they decided to caulk a boat while it was out of the water and dry, and then when they put it in the water and everything expanded, their boat cracked. Fortunately, it was a small boat and they were near the shore. Otherwise, it could have been very bad. So caulking would have been a very important skilled job. All right, I think we got a couple more seconds. There's actually one of the most famous boat caulkers is from Maryland, Frederick Douglass. Before Frederick Douglass left Maryland, one of his last jobs as an enslaved person was actually working as a boat caulker in Fells Point, Baltimore. That's actually sort of what was the impetus for this. I was reading a little bit about it, and it's just fascinating. In Baltimore, boat caulking was actually a job that was done predominantly by freed African Americans and enslaved African Americans. However, that's not the case for everywhere. When Frederick Douglass gets up to Massachusetts, he actually realizes that they won't allow him to work as a caulker there because that's considered to be a white job, or a white person's job that far north. So it's just sort of a fascinating thing to think about how the different areas had different jobs for different folks. So I think we're ready for our next step. So we've got a lot of material up at the top, but now we have to get it so that it's all flattened out into one piece. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to basically treat this as a giant nail. You'll notice earlier my piece of metal went right through this hole, so we're going to actually use this hole for making our top. So we got it warming up right now. Are there any questions coming through, or no? Nobody? Crickets? All right. So with this one, I'm going to put it in just a little further because I want a really good heat. And this is actually my favorite part of the process because it's almost like magic. You start off with this giant glob, and then all of a sudden it gets pressed down into this nice flat top. So hopefully, if I do everything right, one, I'll get a nice flat top that we can hammer on. And two, if I do everything perfectly right, it'll be centered over the top. Mine, as you can see, is pretty well centered. It's a little off center. There's a little extra meat here. And that's after I did a lot of grinding. I'm going to level with you guys, I'm not the greatest blacksmith ever, so I had to trim a little bit. And this is something blacksmiths would do all the time. You could either be really skilled at smithing or really good at grinding material. All right, there we go. We got a nice good heat. So I'm going to take this, drop it in, and then using my hammer, I'm just going to give it some taps. Trying to get that squared up a little bit. And that's not quite center, but it's thick enough that I have plenty of material to grind off so I can get it to the center point. Again, I would say, oh, pulling it out. So I got two different sets of tongs here. I'm going to be using this set because it's got a little bit of a rounded edge, so it catches my material better. So you can see, it's not quite center, but that's all right. What we're going to do is we're just going to grind it off at the very end. So now the next step is going to be cutting it. I'm going to be doing what's called a hot cut. So I'm literally just going to stick my whole piece into the fire and let it get good and hot. So really quickly, I mentioned that I'm not the greatest blacksmith ever. I wanted to show you folks something. Every time you go to a cooking show, everybody has everything perfect. This is to show you folks that it's not always perfect. So this was my first attempt, and I was really just trying to figure out the mechanics of what it was I was doing. I got a little tiny flat end there. This top is real gnarly and gross. It's real fat and sort of gross. And then my second attempt, I realized how to get the top nice and flat, but I still had issues with my second half. And it still felt a little short in my hand. So then I decided to go the opposite route and make one that was far too long. The theory was with this, I could always cut it off and redo it. And that's probably what I'll end up doing, is just making a caulking iron from this part right here. So yeah, it took a couple tries to get to this point. So our next step is going to be cutting. So we're done cutting it off, it's going to look like this right here. This way, in case I make a mistake, I can, just like in a cooking show, pull out one that's already done. And I think we should have enough heat over there, so we're going to pull it out and see if we can't get something cut. So the first rule of blacksmithing is before you ever take anything out of the fire, you should always have everything set up. So right here, this is going to be my cutting top. gonna have my hammer in my hand, my tongs ready to go. Oop. Remember how I said you should always have everything planned out? Got my measuring stick right here. So I know that I want my piece to be this length, because I marked it off. So, right about there. We'll give it one more tap on the other side. That should happen. Should. There we go. So I'm just going to work it back and forth a little bit. But before I get too far, I'm going to grab a second set of pliers. Sorry, second set of tongs. And grab the bottom half. This way, I don't drop it, I have it bounce off and hit Miss Lindsay's feet. My other piece, I'm going to clench it and put it underneath the forge. Where you always put your hot stuff, just so you don't accidentally step on it. So now we've got one end of our tool done, but now we have to heat up this end. So before we spread it out, we're going to actually add material to it. So we're going to upset it again. So I put this in the fire. And again, I'm really just trying to heat up the very bottom of that. Just say it. It's okay, Lindsay. People know you exist.
So Cynthia Mason said, is it very hot when you are standing close to the forge? How hot does it need to be?
So for the forge, we need about 1500 degrees in order for our metal to get red hot. As far as for me, yes, I am starting to sweat already. A lot of times when I'm actually working, I'll usually stand way over here where it's comfortable while I'm waiting. But right now we're trying to move a little fast, make sure you get everything done in a timely manner. Blacksmiths probably were impervious to heat after a while. I, however, am not. All right, we got a nice good red heat on the bottom there. So we're gonna give it some taps. And again, I'm just doing the same thing as before. I'm tapping it, straightening it out. And then tapping some more. We're going to heat that up one more time. Maybe two more times. And if we don't get it by the next heat, what I'll do is I'll switch. Like I said earlier, sometimes we have to cheat a little bit. So I'll just treat this like a cooking show, and I'll pull out one that we already have for the next step. I should not have left this in while I was smithing. That edge sticking up can actually be dangerous. If I'm hitting something and I'm not thinking about it, I can cut myself on that edge. So that was a bit of a boo-boo. So this right here is what we're going for when we get to the next step. We've got that thickened end. It's a little gnarly looking right now, but we'll get it a little cleaner. As you can see, it's definitely wider than when it started. So I'm just going to put this in there just in case I can't get it in this heat. This way, you guys can see the whole process without having to stare at the screens too long. Plus that top came out better, so it'll be a better looking finished product. Not that I ever make mistakes. So now I'm going to do something a little funky. I'm going to actually dip part way and cool it off. This way this upper material doesn't bend as much. And hopefully more of the force will get concentrated at the bottom. For some reason the bottom getting that material upset always seems to take me longer. Couldn't tell you why. I think probably because I have a less good grip with these tongs. A lot of times when you see people blacksmith, they'll try and leave the material as long as they can for as long as possible so that they can use the material as their grip. We're just going to straighten this out. And I'm going to put this one to the side and see how the other one goes. Alright, still needs a little more heat. Any other questions out there?
Caitlin Mason said, how do you trim a project like that?
How do you what?
Trim a project like that.
Trim?
Yeah.
What do you mean by trim, Miss Caitlin? You mean like cutting my material or picking the project? As far as picking the project, one of the big reasons why I chose this was, again, learning a little bit more about Frederick Douglass and his profession. Another big thing is over at the Calvert Marine Museum, they actually have examples of these tools, and they have a really cool video on using these caulking irons. And so once I saw the process and saw them using the tool, I looked at it and said, that looks easy enough. Sort of eating my words now. But I decided that's what I would do. So actually we're going to include the link for the Calvert Marine Museum's video. So you folks can see how these tools are used. All right, so I'm going to switch over to a different mallet. This is what's called a cross peen. And what the cool thing about cross peen is it's going to actually let me spread the material out more. This is the part that's cool because you sort of get to see it happen right before your eyes. All right, so we got a little bit of a start. We're going to heat it back up again. So I'm going to really bury it in the coals. I'm going to get a little bit of a longer heat. I'm going to heat more of the material. Really quickly, I just want to say a thank you to Miss Lindsay, our person who's been taking our video. She has been the wind beneath our wings for this Lunchtime Learning Series. Anytime you see anything that's live on the park, Lindsay is the one who's actually doing the filming, and she deserves a huge thank you. So all the videos you see that you like, odds are she has her finger somewhere mixed into it. So we got our fire going right now. In order to actually add coal to our fire, you would never put the coal right on top. What you'd want to do is you'd want to take your tool and just from the edges, scoot your coal in. And what will actually happen sometimes is the coal will burn out a little tiny cavity in the center. So sometimes you actually have to tap it down and pack in the coal. And we are in fact using coal, not charcoal. Depending on the time period that you're looking at, one is more common than the other. So if you're looking at like early colonial times, they're using more of charcoal. But as you get later into the century, like 1800s, you start to see more coal being used. And that has to do with the prevalence of trees. So as you start to see trees being cut and timber being more valuable, you see a movement towards coal. Because you can use wood for making charcoal or for building houses, but you can't use coal for building houses. You can see that material is really spreading out nicely. So I'm going to put it back in, give it one more heat, and then I think we got it. How are we doing on time? What time are we at? So this is probably the sort of task that you would give to an apprentice. If you're an expert blacksmith, you could probably knock these out really quick, but it's also something simple enough that you could have your apprentice cut their teeth on. A lot of blacksmiths in America, their professions change over time. So the very first blacksmiths here, a lot of their work would have been doing repairs. You would have been having stuff come over from England, and when it breaks, you don't want to have to wait a year until the next boat comes through. So you'd have your local blacksmith doing repairs. As time progresses and you start to see higher population densities, and you start to see more iron being made in the colonies, you actually start to see more specialization. A tool like this could have been made by just about anyone. You could have gone to your local farrier, a person who specializes in horse stuff, or you could have gone to just about anybody and they would have been able to help you out. All right, we're starting to get our shape, but now we got a little curly Q in there. We got some little edges there that need to get heated up one more time, and then I think we've got it. One of the things to notice is, grab our examples. When you look at our finished product versus one of our practice ones, you'll notice I have these nice clean edges that travel. The way that I got that was I ground it a little bit. So you can see where it's got a little shine to it. That's where I actually ground off material to give it that shape. A lot of blacksmithing is not just sitting there and hammering stuff. It's taking the thing that you hammered and cleaning it up and making it look like a finished product. In every blacksmith shop ever, from the beginning of time until current times, you're going to see files and some sort of way to remove material after you're done heating stuff up. Because you can only get so far with a giant hammer. At some point you have to sort of finish it off and clean it up. So our piece is still going to have some wobbles in it and some waves in it, and that's okay. My goal is just to get it so far along that that only takes me a couple minutes to clean it up. And that's with power tools. It might take me a little bit more time with old-fashioned tools. Ooh. That sparking means I got it a little too warm. Straighten it up a little bit. Get a couple taparoonies on the other side. Taparoonie is in fact the actual term that you're supposed to use. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm looking down it and see if it's straight enough. Looks pretty good. You can see it's fairly down the center. It's a little wider in some spots than I might like it to be. So the thickness that we're going for at the very edge should be about a dime's thickness to a quarter's thickness. So when I start to actually remove material and get this flat, it'll push back and get a little thicker, and it'll be just where I want it. Tap. This is sort of the fidgety stuff. All right, that looks pretty good. You always want to double check before you go and grab it with a tight fist. Here's our tool. Just gonna dunk it one more time because it's still a little toasty on the top. And again, The rest of this I can knock out with a file in a couple, probably an hour I'd say. So I'll flatten off this end a little bit, I'll clean up this side, and clean up this side, and I've got a perfectly functional tool. Yeah, there you go. So if you like this video, awesome, please stay tuned. Next Friday we are going to be doing for our lunchtime learning, weaving on a loom. Yes, weaving on a loom. And Miss Betty's going to be showing you folks a little bit about that process, and I can tell you right now, I'm super pumped for it. All right, so on behalf of Jefferson Patterson Park, stay active, but also stay safe.